Okay, I'm back. Gonna do another arbitrary interlude. Working my way up to doing some more specifically themed pieces. Um, I put up the kind of very off topic for me piece called "What Is Freedom" last night. Um, I don't know. We'll see how that one's received. Um, I don't guess I'll be run off YouTube yet. I didn't get very specific in it, but I did make a case kind of, I guess, forcefully for me compared to how I've been making cases on here. It's one thing being cynical about pop culture or film criticism or you know fan bro websites, etc. It's another thing dealing with anything that smacks of politics. That tends to get everyone's ire raised a bit. And consequently, people become very reactionary. They stop really listening to what you're saying. Um, they just kind of hear what they think they hear. My art teacher in high school, Dean Barber, rest in peace, he used to tell me, don't draw what you think you see, draw what you see. And more with this kind of uh, public discourse regarding things that affect our lives. Uh, People are hearing what they think they hear rather than what they're actually hearing. So, enough of that. I'm going to go over a few things that I'm working on and I'm going to be doing mainly with the videos going forward. This won't be very long. And then I'll probably go ahead and drop another video that actually falls under one of these categories as the day doth wane. So um, I'm going to be back with Blue Review soon. I've already picked out what my next topic's going to be. It should be interesting. I kind of immersed myself in this one. I have another item on the way to me in the mail, even as we speak. My peer support counselor gave me a gift card that enabled me to purchase a box set that I've had my eye on for a while without spending any of my own hard earned dosh on it. So I'm excited about that. Probably won't be here for at least a week. I have been encountering some weird posts online, as usual, on Facebook, as usual, in some of the comic oriented groups that I'm still a member of, and sometimes I scratch my head and wonder why I'm still a member of them. But a somewhat well known inker artist, painter, who was part of Marvel's 1980s peak. For many, it was a peak. For me, it was kind of the beginning of a long, treacherous, dark valley for Marvel. But during the Jim Shooter years, enough said. Anyway, this guy has raised some allegations as to the character and integrity of a well loved and deceased comic book artist. And again, as usual, it was greeted with a bunch of reactionary lynch mob kind of mentality, kind of reactions. That sentence completely fell apart. I'm a little disgusted by it, and I'm hesitant to name names, but I will say that apparently, I'm not going to name the person who began this, maybe not meaning to, but inadvertently began this after the fact witch hunt, many years after the fact. This gentleman's been dead a number of years. But I will name the gentleman who is being pilloried. It's Gil Kane, who I think is one of the most important mainstream comic book artists of all time. Some aspersions have been cast as to his character. I haven't done enough research to see if these are bona fides. Everyone's kind of accepting it at face value, though some people who apparently have kept up with this story, or at least as far as I'm concerned at the moment, non-story, for a number of years, have come out saying it's definitely true that this gentleman is guilty of certain improprieties. They're not like sexual improprieties or violence or any of that kind of thing. It was implied strongly that this man Gil Kane had been stealing other people's artwork, as in plagiarizing, which of course is impossible to lend any credence to, given his extremely distinct style. Turns out that was not what was being leveled at Mr. Kane. It was actually, he was accused of actually stealing others' artwork, literally, like when he worked for one or both of the big two, Marvel, DC, actually taking original artwork that wasn't actually his, and selling them to quote unquote support his personal unhealthy habits. Whatever that means. One person guessed maybe it was gambling. I guess as far as personal unhealthy habits, that's one of the more innocuous ones, relatively speaking. Though it was implied to be some things much worse. But again, no evidence, no actual allegations, just a lot of, smarmy kind of implications. I don't really care what Gil Kane was involved in his personal life. I could care fucking less about that. It has nothing to do with me. I will enjoy his work, and I don't care if he was gambling or if he was, renting prostitutes. It's irrelevant. As far as what he was doing with the money from allegedly from other people's artwork, Marvel had a very bad track record with returning original artwork to those who actually created it, especially during the hallowed Jim Shooter years, where even people like Jack Kirby were fucked over royally. And of course, some people did start taking their own artwork back illegally. It's really theirs, And most of the people that are on record as having done it kept it for themselves or sold it, which is their right. It was their art, or split it with people they collaborated with. And on, say, the inker got some pages, the penciler got some pages. Some people took other people's artwork and got it back to the people who originally drew it, and then some people took them and kept it in their collections. All of this was seen generally as positive actions because they were rebelling against a crooked system. Shooter is a horrible, horrible person. And among many, many sins he committed, one was, doing this kind of extortion number with the artwork. Well, I can't even call it just extortion. I mean, what was he trying to get from these people? He was just doing it out of sadism. Like a company owns it. It's like the company's already published it. So that's first rights. And you already, because of your shitty work for hire, policy, you already own all the characters and story elements within it. So the physical artwork that someone labored over, you can't give it back to them. to do as they see fit, whether they want to hang it on their wall, give it to their grandson, or sell it on eBay when they're broke. Fuck you. That's what I say to Jim Shooter and that whole mentality, that corporate bootlicking mentality. At one of my jobs, comics related, a few years ago, I worked for someone who, actually, I can't really say it was a job, and I worked for because I did it all for volunteer. So no monies were exchanged. But as a volunteer vocation, I worked with/for someone who was a Marvel veteran and who venerated Jim Shooter. Jim Shooter even became involved in the enterprise that I was involved with, and I wanted out. I didn't want to share. I didn't want my name to be associated with a person like that. My then ex-wife was also part of this enterprise. She was totally ignorant of the situation, the characters, the personalities involved, and what had happened. She came to comics, especially Marvel comics, very, very late in her life compared to myself. I grew up around this whole milieu as a fan, and then later as kind of a critic, and attempted to gain work through Marvel, which that was an interesting learning experience. But I didn't want to be part of anything that people who had a person who had denigrated the likes of Jack Kirby and Gene Colan and many others, Roy Thomas, Steve Gerber, etc., had anything to do with. But I don't want to say I was outvoted, but I guess I was outnumbered by the person I was working for, albeit for free, and my ex-wife, who ended up gaining a position of some responsibility with this organization. This person owned and still owns. But I felt very uncomfortable. I felt my integrity was a little bit encroached upon. I don't talk to any of those people anymore. And that's good. I don't have any hard feelings toward the man I was working with or whatever. I just ideologically, he and I are coming from two different. He's coming from a certain tradition. We're around the same age. He's a few years older than me, but he was brainwashed at a young age by these figures he saw as godlike, figures that at the time I was a child, enjoyed their work, but then was never as bowled over with them as the figures that had been in mainstream comics a few years earlier when I was a very small child. But that made the biggest imprint on me. To me, the heroes of Marvel were people like Roy Thomas and Steve Gerber, Steve Englehart, Don McGregor, Frank Brenner, Gene Colan, Jim Steranko, Mike Plug. We could go on and on. But by the time Shooter took over Marvel, I was still very young, but I didn't have any loyalty to him. I didn't have an enormous amount of loyalty to people who he nurtured, like Claremont and Byrne. I enjoyed their works when I was a young child. I grew out of it. I put them away. Frank Miller, that's somebody that Shooter nurtured. And of course, I was a huge Frank Miller fan for quite a while, but not even so much the work he did for Shooter, like on Daredevil. I liked it, but I recognized how important it was. Obviously, I enjoyed the TV series, which was heavily informed by Miller's take on Daredevil. But I enjoyed Ronin, published by DC, quite a bit better. Dark Knight, also published by DC. Electra Assassin, published by Marvel, yes, but with Sienkiewicz on art, who I truly did idolize, someone who Shooter had pushed as a major talent that I was right on. Miller and Sienkiewicz I was right on with. However, I wasn't as beholden to Miller as a lot of people my age and slightly younger, slightly older were. Um, Hence why I'm not as bowled over by his work in general as I used to be. I still love Ronin. Ronin is just a great book, even though Ronin gained a lot of the traction it did because of the fact that Miller had assimilated a lot of strong influences, people like Mobius, people like Kazuo Koike, and Kojima, the two on who did Lone Wolf and Cub, Mobius, who did obviously heavy metal, and Blueberry, numerous other things, worked on films. These were people that were hugely influenced on Miller in the writing and the art of Ronin. Also, Japanese cinema, including the Lone Wolf and Cub films, and a lot of the films that were written by Kazuo Koike are based on his manga. But see, we didn't know that back then. We only had an inkling, if that much. I had an inkling because I had read the World Encyclopedia of Comics when I was about 8 years old. So I had some inkling of these other people, and I'd seen Heavy Metal magazine, though I wasn't a fan initially of it. I was too squeamish. But Miller created a lot of goodwill by assimilating these influences that he, as a young person, were excited about, and he was transitioning them into mainstream American comics. Now that I've seen Mobius's work, the real work, and Koike, etc., Miller's not in their league. He's just not. However, as an homage artist, he was brilliant at distilling that material. Kind of what a lot of people think about Quentin Tarantino as a filmmaker. There are people who unreservedly love him for him. I'm not one of those at all. And then there are people who, respect that, okay, well, he kind of distilled an enormous amount of cinema that he was into. The vast majority of it, which in my opinion is far superior to any of his own work, into a certain gestalt for a younger generation, my generation, Gen X, and the millennial generation. And a lot of those people have traced his antecedents and found them and enjoyed them as a result of his work. He's often thanked for that. Like, well, he got me into so and so. I got into so and so because of Tarantino. The majority of people I've ever known, online or in person, though, generally just stop at Tarantino because they like the way he has distilled that work. They don't really care about any of the filmmakers that he homaged. They have tunnel vision. But there are people who he did get into the stuff. Now, me personally, I was already on this track. When I found Tarantino, I was already going in this direction. So to me, he was contemporaneous with it. He didn't inspire me to go, oh, I think I'm going to go check out XYZ filmmaker. I think I'm going to go check out all these people that he homaged. I was already drawn towards that spectrum. He was part of it to me. Tarantino influenced someone only slightly younger than him, Takashi Miike, and I can really see that, But Miike also was beholden to the stuff that came before Tarantino. I mean, he's already remade, he remade The Quiet Family, he remade Harakiri, he remade 13 Assassins. Tell me some other remakes that Miike did. So he obviously already had a loyalty to that kind of stuff. Him and Tarantino were of the same generation. I'm not of their generation. I'm not a boomer. I'm a little younger. Well, a lot younger than Tarantino, but and it's just that same thing. It's like I always like to find who did it first, or who as close as possible to who did it first. So I'm always surprised. Like in music, I love David Bowie. I love Peter Gabriel, at least his earlier stuff. I love Rob Halford, Judas Priest. quite a lot of figures. Turns out John Lydon, turns out they were all influenced by Peter Hammill. He was kind of there first. He was a contemporary of David Bowie's and just ahead of the curve of Peter Gabriel, and a big influence on Rob Halford, on Bruce Dickinson, on Mark Smith of The Fall, on John Lydon. Hammill is a seminal figure that needs to be discussed more. The Van der Graaf generator and solo work. To me, that's when you dig in and you go, wow. Or David Allen of Gong and Soft Machine. You know, he was like one of the first hippies in Britain. He was like older than most of the hippies. He was born in the 30s. He was the first guy allegedly in London to have super long hair in the early 60s. Dave Brock, you know, I mean, he was busking through the 60s and started Hawkwind in 69. He was already 28 years old. Fascinated by these people, by the pioneers. And of course, Bowie himself was an incredible innovator. But even Bowie would hear something like when he got into Kraftwerk and motor Rick kind of rhythms, and then would do Station to Station. You know, he would, especially his work with Eno, he would take elements from pop culture, low brow culture, and high culture, classical traditions and European traditions, and he would synthesize them. And, you know, he created a standard, but he was a creative being. He wasn't a copy artist, you know. So anyway, I'm going on a long tangent about Frank Miller and this whole kind of, you know, way of rebranding classic work, I guess, for another generation, another set of sensibilities. Miller was brilliant at it. And, but just because Shooter celebrated people like Miller and Sienkiewicz, who were kind of postmodern in their way, that doesn't mean he was any good as an editor or as a human being. I liked some of his Avengers stories and some of his Legion stories, which he wrote when he was a teenager. He always favored very emotional storytelling, and I liked that. But by the time he got to Secret Wars 2, it was ham-fisted, and if he had had an editor over him, surely they would have rejected that crap as unpublishable. But anyway, yeah, so when I got into the point where I was working on a volunteer situation for something that included him or sycophants of his, I wanted out of it, and I gradually, you know, kind of begged off of the whole operation, and that's good. And of course, my wife left me, and you know, and then who knows, you know, that's a whole bunch of water under the bridge. Not sure how I started this exactly with the Shooter thing, but I think I was kind of, yeah, how did I start this? Maybe you can rewind and tell me. But anyway, those are some, the Gil Kane thing, yeah. Well, the Gil Kane thing is unfortunate, and I don't know if Gil Kane stole other people's artwork and sold it for some nefarious habit. I don't care. But that bothered me a lot. Okay, on to some other things. On a positive side, a few episodes ago, I talked about some people on YouTube that I really liked their channels, a couple of true crime channels, Eleanor Neal and That Chapter, aka Mike O. So let me talk about another channel that I've mentioned on a bunch of videos that have never been, weren't finished or weren't posted because I wasn't happy with them. So this time around, I'm going to talk about Girl Behind the Counter. I owe her a shout out. I've owed it to her for weeks. She has been doing something similar to my Blue Review stuff a bit longer than I have. There are definitely similarities between what we're doing, the things we're doing, and then there's some, you know, differences. First of all, she's a young, vivacious, beautiful woman, none of which I am. Very, very intelligent, very sharp, knows her film, knows her genres, has a great sense of humor. She's getting better every video. Girl Behind the Counter, that's the name of her channel. That's also her identity on Facebook. She is a member of a Facebook film group that I own that I'm really proud of called Deep Images. She and I have been corresponding some, and I've been meaning to mention her because of the channels about movies that I watch. What she's doing reminds me the most of what I'm doing, even though, like I said, there's quite a bit of differences. But we have tackled some of the same genres and films, and enjoy a lot of the same things. She is very. She has a very almost self-effacing but kind of humble sense of humor. Um, doesn't take herself too seriously, but can be very firm and assertive about her views because they are well informed. She's talked about a few things that I've either talked about on here or online or that I enjoy of late, like Possessor by Brandon Cronenberg, which I didn't, I thought was okay. I think we had about the same view on that. Um, Japanese film, especially the Iroguro subgenres. Uh, One of her favorites is Blind Beast, which is one of my favorites too. I adore that movie and anything by Yasuzo Masamura. And what else? She talked about Guinea Pig, Mermaid in a Manhole recently, which is by far the best of the Japanese guinea pigs, in my opinion. I love Hideshi Hino's filmmaking, even though most of it, the kind of faux snuff things, it has, I guess they have their place. It's not my favorite storytelling wise. But Mermaid with a Manhole was sickening while also had a poetry to it, which a lot of Hano's comic book work is like that too, especially Hell Baby, which I think is it's a grotesque and yet a very sad, poignant story. I don't have the graphic novel anymore. It got lost when I moved 5 years ago. I told the girl behind the counter, who sometimes calls herself Bridget Bardot, for all you know. Uh, I'll just say Miss Bridget. I told Miss Bridget about Hell Baby. I recommended that. Hell Baby kind of uh, work that I think is kind of like Hell Baby. That's American by someone who an artist I'm familiar with and who I actually know personally, though I haven't talked to him in years. Mike Diana, his work, especially his comic, I think it was called Superfly, and has nothing to do with blaxploitation. I sold that one recently. That one and I think one called Sour Balls or something like that. But they had that same idea, that really grotesque, almost mean-spirited kind of thing going for it, and yet also kind of sad and poignant and horrible, horrific, tragic. I think Hano's is a lot more developed than Mike's, but Mike's work reminded me of his, which I would hope Mike would see that as a compliment. But anyway, yeah. So Girl Behind the Counter is a great channel. Just if you just want to get some interesting, unconventional viewpoints laced with humor and trivia and some very thoughtful viewpoints on kind of odd and out of the mainstream films, then you could do a lot worse than to check out her channel. So the other thing I wanted to mention is two things I'm going to go ahead and embark on very soon as video tangents of their own. One is I'm going to do some more on music chapters, and I've decided to maybe not reach for something quite so ambitious for the time being as the Black Sabbath or the projected Hawkwind pieces, but I'm really just going to talk about albums that I've been discovering lately or enjoying listening to lately. So mostly I find these on YouTube, and there's a lot of them. So all different kinds of genres, artists I either like and I'm rediscovering them, or I'm ferreting out work of theirs that I've never heard before or never fully appreciated. And then artists I've never heard of, albums I've never heard of. I'm always testing myself, challenging myself, trying to expand my horizons in that area of music and in all areas of music. And so I figured it was time just to say, hey, this week I've listened to XYZ, 5, 10 albums on YouTube, and here's what I think of them. Here's what I think of the artists. Here's a little information I gleaned about them. Do I recommend them or not? Well, I probably will only be doing ones I recommend, unless I hear something that's particularly horrible. Then I'll single it out. But generally, I try to stick with things that I like. So that's something I'll be doing for the On Music column, whatever show going forward. I'll try to put one of those up in the next several days. I'm compiling a list of all these recent items that I've been listening to and absorbing. So I have a lot to say about those. So I'll get to that. Finally, probably the very next show or episode or whatever video I'm going to do, barring, my attention span being, tugged in some other direction, is going to be on some television shows that I've been enjoying recently. Recent television shows, and there's some themes involved. I don't watch an enormous amount of TV. I try to keep up with kind of get an idea of everything that's out there and kind of keep up with what might be of interest to me. I do have access to just about everything that's out there, even though I don't subscribe to all these premium services. I have my ways. So thanks to some friends of mine who've hooked me up with being able to watch quite a few of these things with no additional charge to myself. But I like to talk about some science fiction shows. Some of these are big franchise shows. There's 2 or 3 that I particularly have watched very recently and enjoyed and had various thoughts on. Then as far as like the ubiquitous superhero shows, there's a number of these that I've been enjoying here in the last year, some just in the last few months. And it turned out that all these ones that I was writing on my list were all based on DC Comics, and they were all live action programs. So, about 4 or 5 of these. People who hear me talking a lot on here can probably guess what some of them are. Maybe not all of them. So, one of those areas I'll be talking about. So, I'm not going to make like a full-fledged TV column or show like the Blue Review. But I think it's something that I delve into enough and regularly enough to where I could do it, periodically. But I definitely want to discuss some of those things I've just alluded to. So that's going to be it for the arbitrary interlude, and then whatever video I post next will deal specifically with one of these areas. And I appreciate you listening to these ramblings and sorted thoughts, and I will be back soon. Thanks a lot for subscribing, and please subscribe if you haven't, and give me a thumbs up if you haven't, if you find it worthy, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.